Good thing I wasn't still singing and yelling at the cat.
Yeah, that would have been a great introduction, actually. So I wish I had recorded it.
She's still sitting there mad. Look at her. Look at that. She turned her head.
So this is On the Rec Yard, and I'm Marcy Marie.
And I'm the Toonch. I'm Toonchy.
Tunchi, and we are talking about mental health care issues during incarceration. What that looks like, what that means, what we both faced with our own mental health.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, and from jail to prison, because, I love somebody posted something on LinkedIn the other day that was like, hey, guess what? Jail and prison's not the same thing. And there's very different services. There's a whole two different beasts. Caging human beings, but in two different ways. And so looks very different in both. So do you want to show the video or do you want to talk first? Do you want to let's talk about our experiences with mental health. If you feel comfortable, I don't mind sharing my mental health struggles.
I
Just how
don't
do you,
either.
okay.
Yeah, I don't mind sharing because I have on my videos, but I did not put any of my videos on here. And maybe I should have, but you go first.
Oh, okay. So, I told a friend of mine we were at a conference or training earlier or late last year, and we just stood around and talked about our mental health. And it was like, this fits. I was first locked up when I was 15, and it was for a very serious offense. It was crisis. I had been experiencing crisis for many years leading up to this incident. And I remember going through trial. And first of all, state psychiatrist, and I've shared this before when I asked, what's wrong with me? Why did I do this? Like really, really confused about my mental well-being. Why am I making the decision? Feeling very swept away in what was happening in my mind, like just being tossed in the ocean and just drowning. That's what it felt like. And of course, early 90s children that committed offenses, he told me essentially I didn't have a soul, that I didn't have a conscience. And I struggled with that. That didn't help my mental health for many years. But I do remember our psychiatrist told me that I had something called borderline personality disorder. Had no clue what it was. Nobody told me, Marcy. Nobody explained it to me. I remember him talking on the stand about it, but I wasn't tracking through the whole thing. I'm 15, I'm mentally ill, and just, experiencing all this overwhelming stuff. Go to the Texas Youth Commission. Nobody brought it up. Years go by, my whole incarceration. And I end up in crisis again after I've been released and I'd been stable, right? But all those symptoms came back, especially under relationship stress. People with personality disorders symptoms manifest quickly and strongly with interpersonal relationships. And so I ended back up in jail. And I remember laying on that floor in the drunk tank in the observation room, just crying my eyes out because, like, I knew I'm going back to prison. Like, this is it. I just threw myself through somebody's window. And I remember praying, God, what is wrong? What in the fuck is wrong with me? Why am I doing this? This whole self-destruction, but not really understanding. And in that moment, I remembered that diagnosis. I don't know why, but I did. And so through my incarceration, I studied it on my own because we both know TDCJ didn't provide anything other than coloring pages and maybe a group you could go to for anger management. Just color the circles and write in a journal. I remember, Marcy, sitting in that anger management class at Mountain View, and it was like a I don't know, a month-long course that you go once a week. And the lady said, when you feel angry, just write in your journal. And I said, that's not going to work for me. It's not going to work. No, there's all these coping skills. I said, look, I hear what you're saying, and coping skills I get it. You need coping skills, but tell me why it's wrong. And she was like, what do you mean? I said, tell me why it's wrong when I feel this way and I'm thinking these things, that it's not okay and justified to bust somebody in the face. And she just looked at me like she was not prepared or trained to answer she was giving very surface level therapy, right? And it wasn't until I finally ended up in Safe P, which we is a horrible place, but it was the first time I had cognitive intervention, and that was really the only thing that treats that. And so I began to piece together the stuff that I'd learned on my own, and then through cognitive intervention, and then of course when I got out, really getting into therapy, trauma informed care. I have a therapist out here that you know when recently triggered again bad. I think only y'all that are really close to me know when it's bad. On the outside it doesn't look that way. And I told my therapist, I said, I just wish that I was normal. Like, people hurt me and I shut off. I shut off and never speak to them again. And don't care. And it's not a lack of empathy. It's just this thing that happens to me. She said, Miss Toon, if you've not hurt yourself and you've not acted out and you've not gone to jail or prison or lost your job, then let's not judge ourselves for it. She goes, quite frankly, that's a normal response for trauma victims, for people who have suffered abuse, like you've told me about your childhood. And that was the first time, Marcy, I'd ever heard that what was going on with me. And my response is, I wasn't crazy. I wasn't a weirdo. I wasn't just not able to control myself. Like, there was a real reason why I had that pattern way of thinking. And it was from a place of trauma. And I know that word gets tossed around a lot now, but it is true. So once I finally had treatment, it's still a struggle. I hope people know that don't have mental health issues, is you can be treated and seemingly stable, but it is a day to day. It really is.
You know what? You know what I got out of that, Tunchi? If your mental health disorder, your personality disorder, had been treated, if you had been counseled and given the tools to learn how to handle that, you probably wouldn't have gone back to prison, because your crime that sent you back to prison was a direct result of your mental illness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's like, when I think back to what happened when I was a kid, living in rural East Texas, you don't talk about mental health. It is the number one area in the state that has the highest suicide rate, is East Texas. Stigma, people with their religious beliefs don't believe in psychiatry or treatment or therapy. And, I see why all that happened when I was younger. But certainly when I got out of the system the first time, no follow up, no care, no specialized treatment. Nobody brought that disorder up to me until I remembered it laying on that floor in the jail. And when I started treating that, I'm not saying I haven't had really rough times, but when I started treating that with the things that work for that, I am almost 1,000 times better. You know what I mean? I love you too, Mandy.
Absolutely. I do know what you mean. I want to show one of the videos. I have a few that I picked out before I talk, because it just relates so well to your story. So let's see if I can get it on real quick.
The single largest mental health facility in the U.S.
Jail and prison. In 44 U.S. states, the jail or prison houses more mentally ill individuals than the state's largest remaining psychiatric hospital. Perhaps of paramount concern when it comes to this population in jails or prisons, inmates with mental health issues are significantly more likely to be abused while they're incarcerated, or attempt and or commit suicide. And quickly, I will talk about 3 ways that we can improve the mental health crisis in our prisons and jails. First, we have to have crisis intervention teams, and not just police, dealing with those individuals who are in a state of mental illness in the community. Second, we need to have more diversionary courts. We can't just incarcerate these individuals. We need to have options to incarceration. And lastly, we need to deal with reentry. We cannot just release these individuals from these lengthy periods of incarceration into the street without any sort of community support whatsoever. Basically, y'all, We have to decriminalize having a mental health issue.
First of all, I apologize for those of you watching and not listening. The video is cut off and it was letting me toggle in our practice. It does not let me do that now. Of course, naturally, it doesn't allow that when you're actually live streaming. So, yeah, I just love how, I mean, what she said. Where are the mentally ill people? They're incarcerated. They're incarcerated and they're not getting any help and they're not getting any treatment.
Yeah, no, I'm going to agree with you. I mean, I think through what we all saw in jail and certainly in state prison, I think there's some areas that have gotten better, and there's some counties that are doing much better than other counties. But I mean, I think overall, it's what the lady said. I mean, let's stop people from going to jail and prison in the first place.
Absolutely. I think there's so many preventative measures that can happen in our communities. Um, if we're taking the money and the cost that it takes to incarcerate someone, and if we're putting it at the forefront of that pre-incarceration into programs, I think that's definitely better for everyone. So, um, my mental health issues in prison. Um, so, Jennifer, I was also diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And a lot of people incarcerated are diagnosed with that. I don't know if you came across a lot that have that. I did. So the way that I found out that I had that, actually, about my fourth or fifth year in prison, um, I lost my shit, for lack of a better word, right? So I completely went all the way downhill. Um, It began with, like, behavioral changes, acting out, bucking up against the system, bucking up against the laws, um, speaking when things didn't have anything to do with me, just making bad decisions for my life as someone incarcerated, making it harder on myself, and all of that just kind of ended up with, suicide attempts. So I kinda wanna talk about what happens when there's a suicide attempt on a Texas prison, on a women's unit in Texas. Um, so I, took a handful of blood pressure pills. I bought them. I bought them off of somebody. So they were in somebody's box that they were supposed to take one a day, and it was somebody that didn't get commissary, and she sold me the whole card. I don't even remember exactly what I paid for them. Anyways, so that caused me. So here I am, a suicide attempt, and actually I went twice, but this is one of the times. And what happens is they put you on direct observation, right? So they take you to solitary confinement, they put you in a cell empty, nothing's in the cell, and they post up a guard on the outside. So for me, it was a male guard, naturally. And there he is. You're there having to use the ladies' room, all of that, with this man that is literally instructed not to take his eyes off of you. So, and then you get taken to the ice house. The ice house is the crisis management, and I've talked about this before on the show, so I won't go into just huge detail. But you're in a room, a filthy room, completely naked. I didn't even have a blanket the first night. Um, I mean, completely humiliating. Blood on the wall, feces on the wall. If you're on your cycle and you need a new, I mean, you're naked, so, but all they give you is a pad. So you literally just have to hold it there. And to
Mhm.
get a clean pad, you have to hand an open soiled pad to the officer. It's completely humiliating and degrading. And if you do not have thoughts of suicide, or you have any self-worth left when you get there, it goes away. Being held like that. So I was there, one time for 21 days and then one time for 13 or 14 days, housed just like that. And so definitely you're not getting treated. I ended up, one of the times they did send me to the state prison hospital. The Skyview unit in Rusk, Texas. They had a counselor there, and it was better than the treatment on the unit. It was
Mhm.
more staff compared to inmate ratio as far as medical care. Um, I felt like I was being heard a little more, but I'll still tell you, anytime I met with the actual psychiatrist, there was an officer sitting
Right.
right there with
Right.
me.
Right.
So, I quickly learned to just say what I needed to say to get the heck out of there and not really do any in-depth exploration. But that is where I was diagnosed. So, uh, I want to go ahead. I'm going to just show y'all part of the video and then I'll stop it. So, and I'm sorry, I don't even know, Jennifer, if it's going to show because it won't let me toggle back into the other mode to show it, and the words aren't going to show. So let's just explain what it is. I'm going
Okay.
to show you her face though. I'll show the very first part just so you can see the lady. So this is a nurse, a therapist that works in a jail, and she has a TikTok channel. I'm going to show you the first part, then I'll cut it off and we'll just tell you what happens. That's her. That's her. So the opening line of that video says something to the effect of things my patients have said to me as a therapist in jail. And then the video goes on to show flashes of mugshots and quotes on each mugshot. Things like, I don't know, Jennifer, I don't even remember one of the quotes, just kind of degrading, stupid. Um, One of them I think was like, I don't even
Don't, if
remember.
something was like, "Don't, I'm gonna punch you in the face, lady," and some of it was, obviously comments that people are making who are not well, or who are in a state of agitation, or who are delusional.
Right, right. So it's like 5 quotes, 5 mugshots, and each one with an expression in quotation marks. Now, in the comments, she says the mugshots are not her real clients. She's not breaking any HIPAA laws. But what she is doing is completely justifying the fear that incarcerated individuals have in the medical staff in prisons.
Yeah, absolutely. And just the her dancing and the tone and the music, and it is essentially making fun of the people with mental health needs in a county jail as a staff person, as a medical provider. And you're absolutely right. There's no way in the world um, that I'm going to trust prison or jail staff with my therapy. I'm going to do just what you said, and especially because staff is always sitting there listening. I'm going to say what I need to say, and I'm going to try to work myself through my self will uh, out of this situation. Um, yeah, it's outrageous, and that's, she's not an anomaly. There are people like that all in our state prisons and jails, and probably state hospitals too.
I think that that's something to be said, like as far as recidivism goes, and it's your story plays right into that, right? When you're not getting treated for your mental health care or not getting taught any tools, and put in a situation where you're scared to even kind of seek that out the few opportunities that you get. So, yeah, Danica is making a very good comment here about her son, and she just knows, she's saying that, um, she says, I just love both you ladies. Love how you love talking about what you all have been through to help others. I also have mental illness. So does my son. So she knows exactly how hard it is. And I think that a lot of people can relate to that. There's a stigma associated with mental illness, and people don't always speak about it. But believe me, there's a lot more struggling with that kind of thing than you might think.
Hmm. Absolutely. It's crazy, right? Like it's so stigmatized, but I can't think of one family, even the most stable, well-to-do family, that's not touched by mental health needs. That's a good question, Shaquille Oatmeal. I love y'all's names. They just delight me. I hope mine delights y'all. I'm named after Little Wayne. Are inmates are able to be prescribed antidepressants and anxiety medication? Well, yes. The problem is, most of what we were prescribed was to tranquilize us, and not really provide for balancing or anything like that. Was that your experience, Marcy, or with the women around you?
Well, so there's like a few medications that TDCJ approves, or, and so, or I don't know if it's UTNB that makes the approval, or I don't know the process, but I just know there's just a handful of medications that are prescribed for everything. So there were plenty of medications that were prescribed for seizures, and also for mental health,
Hmm.
and we saw a lot of crossover like that, but it was just a few different ones. So there wasn't like a big variety. And I mean less than five
Yeah.
as far as any kind of mental health care.
And
Five,
and here's and here's the interesting thing about our pharmacy, as we can also discuss next, maybe some other episode about healthcare in general, is that the prison pharmacy with the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, they control the pharmacy. So UTMB and Texas Tech, which serves some other prisons, those entities provide our health care, and they will prescribe us things when we go to the prison hospital, and then we get back and we don't get them. And that's because there is a preferred list, there's an approved list through TDCJ's pharmacy. A lot of times, pain medication, you can forget it. And I think maybe that might even play into mental health medication. And the reason why is there is a belief, and I have heard this from staff, from higher ups at TDCJ about the pharmacy. We don't do a lot of pain medication because people will abuse it. We've got some basic painkillers like Tylenol, and you can live with pain. That's what he said. You can live with pain. It's not a necessity to treat the pain. We've got basic Tylenol. Tylenol threes was the big stuff, and that's all you're getting. And that certainly, like Marcy said, when it came to antidepressants, a lot of it was that crossover, that treated health conditions and not primarily mental health issues.
Nurse Adrian, and she's been with us this whole time, Tunchi. So we sure appreciate that. We appreciate everybody that's joined us tonight. Approximately half the people in U.S. jails and over 1/3 of the population of U.S. prisons have been diagnosed with a mental illness. And I'm surprised, actually, and that's been diagnosed. I think that the number is probably significantly higher than that, because just from my experience in Tunchi, you can probably say that too. It's definitely an issue in there. and then Nurse Adrian she's really, that video really got to her. She's saying it's unethical. It's an ethical violation, depending on her credentials. And I'm not sure what it is. And I'll share that channel with you, Nurse Adrian, when we get off. But that video really upset me. And I experienced something similar to that in regards to my experience with dealing with my mental health while I was incarcerated. So, I get back from the hospital. It's months later, and I'm already feeling better. I'm in a much better place in my mind. And I'm at in the chow hall with my dorm, with my friends. We're sitting at the table, we're eating, and there's an officer that monitors the chow hall. And she comes up and she sees me, and she makes a vocal reference, a vocal reference to what I did with my suicide attempt in a mocking way in front of the officer next to her and in front of everybody at the table. I was I was humiliated, to say the least. And it's because through that I had to do the whole thing. I had to have charcoal shoved down my throat so that the pills wouldn't harm my body. I mean, just the whole experience with medical and everything that took. I mean, it's more than that, like more probably than I'm really willing to share right now. But she had to be right there with me, next to me through that whole thing. And so she knew every detail of my mental health issue and the results of that. And now so did everybody that was in the chow hall that I lived with. That, and it was horrible. I had no right to privacy in there.
Right. Yeah. And it kind of goes hand in hand a little bit with what we were saying last week about bullying, right? And I think the lady in the video, when she was talking about, different ways to tackle the problem of mental health and, criminalizing mental health, is that I just lost my train of thought. Like I don't know what happened. I don't know if I'm dissociating right now because we're talking about all this.
Yeah, it's serious.
What did she say? Please go ahead, because she made a really great point that I wanted to point out, and I just
it's going to come to you. It's going to come back to you. So Sylvia says she's still going through so much. It's frustrating because people don't really understand how fear gets inside after being there for so long, being at places, standing in line, or being loud. So she's really kind of referring to new mental health issues that come up because of the trauma of incarceration, and that's something that's definitely, that's right in this topic. And it's right on. It's there and it's real and it happens not just to me,
right,
to
because
my
if you go
family
in,
even.
you go in, you already go in. I feel like everybody that there are people that end up in the system unjustly completely, but you've committed an offense, right? I believe everybody is suffering from some type of mental health condition, because people who are stable in their mental health would have not been in the situation to have committed this offense. And again, I'm talking about people that, like myself, or, like you, that committed something and not being arrested just simply because they're a person of color. Okay. Because that's a whole nother issue, and that happens.
Right.
But those of us that ended up there because, hey, I've done this, whatever it was, right? You weren't well in your mind. You weren't well in your mind. And then you get there. And then you have all this abuse heaped on you on top of that mental health condition, and exasperates it. And then it affects our loved ones on the outside as well.
Tunchi, Rhonda's talking to you. This is a good question.
Yeah, it is a good question. Hey, Rhonda, I'm glad that you're here with us tonight. You have to subscribe to the YouTube channel, you guys. I see some of y'all on Facebook, and we love seeing you here. But eventually, we'll just be streaming to the channel on YouTube. So make sure you subscribe. Rhonda says, it's still a major case for crying out for help and resulting in a suicide attempt? So back in the day, right, that was a major case, and the disciplinary code you got for it was destruction of state property. That's not a joke. That people that would cut their wrist or do something to harm themselves or practicing self harm because the people cut and that kind of thing. Going back later, I want to go back later and talk about what you said about the majority of women having BPD. But yeah, you used to get a case for it, major disciplinary for damaging state property because you're state property. Now I don't think that they do that. But medical has to make your bond, and make your bond is our prison slang for vouching for you, for taking up for you, for clearing your case out, right? Like they've got to show and say, hey, this is a mental health issue that's going on. So I don't think people really get written up for that. They would get TDCJ would get their asses blasted everywhere if they were still doing that, and I just haven't heard of them doing that in a long time.
What I got now, my cases were in 2016,
Mm-hmm.
and my cases were not destruction of state property, but just the blanket one, disobeying a direct order. Now, no one ordered me like don't take those pills, but that actual case, that actual charge, it can be a direct order that's like in the handbook, or a direct order that anything that's posted, or I think it even says disobeying a direct order could be anything that you know is aligned with TDCJ policy, even
Right.
if you've never been told it or it's not written anywhere. So, yeah, but I got cases for mine. I
And
absolutely
so
did.
did medical not clear them? Did they not make your bond and clear them?
I did not get those cleared. I didn't pursue for them to be cleared. So I got red cases, y'all. I was handcuffed and at the back gate getting into the van to go to transport for crisis management after I had been puking my guts out and, frankly, sitting on the toilet because they shoved charcoal down my body. And that's what condition I was in, naked underneath a gown, tears, swollen face, and they came to read me a disciplinary case for taking pills. It was for disobeying a direct order. And I something to the effect, you know how it goes. In offender Simmons 1743246 did disobey a direct order by swallowing pills that were not hers, and it was a double coded case because it was also contraband, because the pills were contraband because they weren't mine. So I go all the way to that time. I go all the way to the hospital. I'm gone for months, and I come back, and that case was sitting there waiting for me. So
Unbelievable.
I went to medium custody. I came back from the hospital, they put me in um, administrative segregation or solitary confinement so that I could go to court for those cases. I go to court, get found guilty, and get G4'd for it. I went to medium custody behind a suicide attempt. So
And Marcy, that again, really, it's so crazy, right? Like as you and I share stories, and I've was at Lane Murray when I was younger, and I did my first stint at the Crane unit, which is a death trap. It's so old and decrepit and nasty and terrible. But my last 10 years was at Mountain View, and there's a crisis center there, and they did not do that anymore. Like the women that would have mental health crises there, it was not handled like that. And that's just how different a unit can be from the next. And we were literally right across the road from each other.
I could see Mountain View when we went outside to work. We
Mm-hmm.
worked in your backyard. I
Yeah.
walked to Mountain View's backyard and was, picking potatoes or whatever. So, Christy's talking about Safe P, which you and I have both been through. The amount of actual individual therapy is almost non-existent, and this is for a program. This isn't regular prison. This is an in-prison program. And Christy's right. The amount of individual therapy absolutely is almost non-existent. That's a 6-month program. She says, I had a repeat DWI charge, so I needed to deal with the underlying issue, and she did not get the opportunity to do that while she was incarcerated. And I think that's the common thread amongst anybody with mental illnesses that did time.
There is no individualized treatment. There is no one-on-one with a counselor. And at SafeB and ITPC, which is mainly for substance use, although lots of people got sent to that program that didn't have substance. You didn't, right? So they use that program as a catch-all if other programs are full and you did a lot of time. Well, it's behavior modification. So behavior modification, if that term sounds foreign to people, it is a type of therapeutic model. It's what I went through when I was in the Texas Youth Commission. It really traumatized me. So you essentially, you're holding each other accountable. So I'm telling on you and bringing you to group for rule violations. And it's group led. It's this, structure that we're modifying your behavior. That's all we're doing. We're not digging deep into the root with therapy. It is to change your behavior through fear, through punishment, through accountability partners, and us having group and confronting one another, which I see the value in what we called encounter circle, right? Like, Marcy, I'm bringing you to encounter sister, because we had to call each other sister. Sister, I'm bringing you to the circle today because you were talking in the lion and chow, and it's against the rules. And it reminds me of a time I felt scared and confused. It reminds me of a time when I was younger and my brother would do stuff and I was scared and nervous that my dad was going to come yell at us. Right. So even though the reasons were stupid, I did appreciate that model of being able to look at my thoughts and my feelings and saying, what does this remind me of? Because it's not Marcy talking in the chow hall that's upsetting me. Right. So there is some level of behavior modification techniques that can be useful. We had a decent guy that did our cognitive intervention, but again, this is all group stuff. There's the most effective therapy for me has been a counselor who is specializing in the things in my disorder. And you do not get that in prison, period. They don't have time. They don't have time. They don't have staff to see everybody on a vigil. And if you go to medical to get your psychiatric medication, you see that one real psychiatric, because a psychiatrist is the only one that can prescribe medication. You've got one for all the units that you see on telemeds that he checks off a box. Okay, great. Now I'll refill your medicine. And that's it. So spot on, Christy. Absolutely.
That SafeP, I remember I was there during COVID. We didn't even have we didn't have any of that.
We have shit.
No, we had nothing. They slid paperwork under the door and we would have to sign it and slide it back, so that's what we were working with. It was really ridiculous that then at the end of that program, they were saying, look, all of these graduates. And I thought, well, gosh, I mean, I really
got it out.
Yeah. It was unbelievable. Gosh.
Oh, I know what it was that I wanted to say with that in that video. She was mentioning all the ways that could help and all the problems, in the system. And I really thought she was going to say, and we talked about it earlier, is being diagnosed, right? Like, so there's a certain number of people with diagnosed mental health conditions in the system, but so many people we lived with them, were undiagnosed. You can tell through their behavior and their thoughts and that there's something going on. And that's a problem that we see in county jails when we've worked on legislation in our separate jobs, is that the ability to diagnose people when they enter jail, which is a lot of times, Marcy, where people are even touched with healthcare, sadly. This is their first encounter with the system and to getting services. And, there was a bill last session that I believe it was Senator Zaffarini's office worked on to better help jailers and law enforcement identify people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, because they too, along with people with mental health concerns, are bullied, victimized, not treated. They don't get sufficient treatment. They have behaviors that manifest, and staff does not understand autism. So you're punishing someone and they don't understand what's happening, and they just continue to escalate because they don't understand what's happening. In providing for that training in county jails. And like I said earlier, some counties are doing a little bit better in terms of, diagnosing people. But again, short of staff, everywhere is short of staff, overwhelmed. It's a problem, but being diagnosed is a huge problem. And you just go right through the system undiagnosed, and you get all the way to prison, and you've had a crisis, and they think that you're just being willfully, disobedient.
So you mentioned the police not knowing how, not being trained to deal with mental health, and I think just the legal system as a whole, right? Nobody's knowing how to handle it. We're not handling it. And we have to bring up Anthony Mitchell, that case that happened in Alabama, guys. His cousin, Anthony Mitchell's cousin, called the police to do a wellness check on Mr. Mitchell because he was not mentally well. His cousin was concerned about him. The police came, and Anthony was definitely in the middle of some kind of mental health crisis, and he was taken, instead of to a hospital, he was taken to the county jail, where he continued to act out in his mental illness. And y'all, and of course, this is not the normal response, because I would say the more normal response to somebody with a mental health crisis is to lock them up and leave them in prison. And from what my personal experience, from what I've seen and what has happened to me, is when you have a mental breakdown and you're incarcerated, the solution for the staff is out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. Put them in a cell by themselves and leave them. Well, for Mr. Mitchell, he was acting out, and those deputies, y'all, put him in a freezer, tied him to a chair, put him in a freezer, locked him in there, and he died. The ER doctor said that he probably died from hypothermia. I haven't read if the autopsy's been complete, so I can't say for sure that that's what happened. Just I do know that the ER doctor was quoted about saying that, and that was on NBC. And we have footage of it. Like, I don't have it with me on here, but there's footage of it. One of the deputies recorded it and turned in the recording. She got fired for it, but it was horrible. And that's how they handled mental health care. The footage of them pulling Mr. Mitchell out of the freezer, and you see medical staff laughing. On the camera, you see deputies laughing and cutting up, and this man is going to the hospital because he's non-responsive because he's been froze.
Yeah. Well, and you're right. It's a total. I always say this: like, we were always the ones demonized for the things that we did to end up in the system, right? Like the therapist telling me I didn't have a soul or a conscience. Well, I mean, I'm not laughing at someone who is half frozen and half dead in a freezer. I was in crisis, and I may have done something serious and violent, but I know as an adult who's been, given a duty to protect people in the community, I'm not pulling out a half frozen dead man and laughing at him in deep mental health crisis.
That footage, I wish that I hadn't watched it. There's a lot of things that I'll look up because I want the information, and I think the information needs to put out there, because a lot of things don't get covered properly when it comes to prisons and jails, and just putting it on my social media gives it more coverage, right? So, but there are so many things that will haunt me, and that's one of them. That footage from there. I want to play another video. Now, if the video's cut off, I'm sorry it won't play the proper way. And it's actually Jesse Crossan on TikTok. It's one of his videos, and his face is going to be all up on the screen because that's what it looks like when it doesn't let me fix.
The majority of guys I was locked up with struggled with addiction, had diagnosed or undiagnosed mental health issues, and or had grown up in poverty, which almost always involves developmental trauma. You would think mental health and addiction treatment would be at the forefront of the Department of Corrections strategy, but it's almost an afterthought. You have at most 3 mental health professionals for a prison of 1,200 men. Now, they may be very good professionals, but if you have 5 or 10 guys who are seriously mentally ill, regularly engaging active self-harm or aggressiveness or lewd behavior, they're going to get 90% of the mental health staff's time, leaving 10% of that time for the other 1,190 people. So it's not surprising when guys get out and reoffend when the underlying issues that led them to prison in the first place are just ignored over all those years.
I liked that
Absolutely.
video. Yep. I liked it because it was spot on with the percentage rate for Lane Murray, where I did my time. 1,300 women and a couple of mental health care providers. And that's how it is. You talked about an anger management in class, anger management class. I did an anger management class. That's the uh, that was a joke. That was a
Right.
joke, right?
You
We
got
met.
your little certificate and you met once a week and you learned how to journal and oh, yay.
I was excited that I got the certificate for parole, and that's what I got out of that class. And I
Mm-hmm.
went because I wanted help. I signed up for it not even knowing I would get a certificate at the end. And I walked away with only a piece of paper.
Right.
So
The parole didn't give 2 flying fucks about and probably wasn't put in the computer. And you didn't get any real therapy there. And he's right. Like you said, you've got over 1,000 people in custody and you've got maybe 3 or 4. If that's pushing it, train mental health professionals and 1 psychiatrist, I'm sure, for all those people. And there is no individualized treatment, anything. I do want to circle back to you said something earlier when you said, I didn't realize that so many women that we were incarcerated with, they too had the diagnosed of borderline personality disorder known as BPD, which, I hate to use comparisons in media because sometimes those can be over exaggerated, but, think of Girl Interrupted and Fatal Attraction and what is that? Harlequin Quinn. So these are really exaggerated forms of BPD. And really, personality disorders are on a spectrum. They fluctuate between several different types, but they really they all have this fundamental sense of emotional dysregulation, meaning I cannot calm my I can't regulate my emotions, and when I feel them, they're either so intense that I act out or I completely go numb. And using and I'm going to use the term manipulation, and that sounds like a really harsh word to use, but using that as a coping skill and as a mechanism to get needs met. And when you look at it like that, it's like, okay, well, I told my therapist, I said, I just, wish I could be normal. And why do I do this? Like, why do I get out of control like this? She was like, all of that was rooted in trauma. So your personality, which this can't be treated with medication, it has to be treated with cognitive intervention and dialectical therapy, which is something TDCJ and jails can't provide because it's very intensive individual therapy to help shape your thoughts. I said that to a friend of mine that's at Crane right now at Riverside. And she was like, girl, like all these, she's one of few people that have never demonstrated that, but she's got bad generalized anxiety. But so she's like, Jennifer, why does this girl say this and do this? And then one minute she's that, and the next minute it's like there's a whole nother, she just became a whole nother person and this, and she copes like this, and she cries and screams, and she's dramatic, and then she, all this stuff she's describing. I'm like, Girl, almost everybody I know there has those same symptoms. And it's rooted. And I think that that's true, Marcy. I think that maybe people get diagnosed or labeled with things that, maybe they don't have. But from my experience, the people that we were incarcerated, in so many ways, we were different, right? Like your story coming into, my story coming in, we grew up very differently from the large majority of the women that we were incarcerated with. But at the root of it, we all kind of had very similar mental health struggles, symptoms, I guess you would say. Yeah, like I don't find it shocking at all, and I think that's true for a lot of prisons around the country, that there is a high diagnosis of that.
I didn't start to really address or learn how to deal with BPD until about the second year to me going home, about my 8th year in. My bunkie said something about her having it, and I said, "Oh, that's what they said at Skyview. That's what the counselor said that I must have." And she had done all of this research on her own, and she opens her box and pulls out 3 books.
Yeah, yeah,
Like she knew she wasn't gonna get help where she was,
that's
and
right.
she told her family, "I need help. Please send me some literature," and they sent it to her, and her and I dove into that, and, that's where I started seeing, oh, when they started talking about, this is a symptom," and I was like, "Oh, check, check, check. Well, they were probably right, and how do you deal with it, and what are you looking for within?" I mean, and it was pretty intense, but it was complete self-help, and again, that's somebody with privilege in prison, because you have to have somebody on the outside willing to send you that, to even think of that to happen, and, I benefited because her family had sent that in, and I was very fortunate for it,
Right.
for sure.
Yes. And this is why, and when I tell people, like when I went back, because people say, well, what is different now? I said, therapy that matches the symptoms that I experience. And so you worked on that when you were in prison? Oh, no, no, no. No. I remembered what it was and I did it. Like you said,
Mhm.
I was able to secure books to give myself self-help, and I would get books that were how to deal with a loved one that has VPD, right? And I would read those because they would tell them, they would really break it down, what was going on, what would the thought pattern. And I'm like, oh my God, like this really, and I learned those coping skills on my own, because that type of therapy, and that's what I've always said. I'm like, why are y'all offering all of this behavior modification and all this and this? The majority of women I know have this particular subset of symptoms that requires deeper therapeutic stuff. Yes, Rhonda. It's like the lady said in the video, right? She's an attorney. We need to decriminalize mental health, and people are charged and taken to jail and prison, for being in crisis, for being
I
in deep
wanted
crisis.
I saw this comment and it made me think about something that I saw online. And it's from an article in the Marshall Project that's a couple years old. And it's just a quote out of it. It says, "The prison environment is almost diabolically conceived to force the offender to experience the pangs of what many psychiatrists would describe as mental illness." And and I thought, "Ding, ding, ding, ding. That's it. That's it, right?" Um, the
Well,
prison
Marcy,
pol
it makes me think when you say that, and maybe we can have a discussion later on at some other point about, if anybody has not read, or there's a film about it as well, about the Stafford prison experiment. You take normal people; they were college kids doing a research project, and they set up within their department a prison. Okay, and they were trying to show, if people were given unlimited power, would they act out, or would they do the morally right thing? And so that the thought was, well, sometimes they may kind of let it go to their head. But for the most part, no, we don't. Girl, they ended the experiment almost immediately because, minus beating one another, they weren't allowed to cause physical harm, but they could do anything else. The participants were like, get me out of this building. Like, because they immediately went, the guards, the ones that were positioned as guards, went into attack, abuse of power immediately. And so it set up an environment that even a normal person with normal functioning mental health was compressed immediately into severe mental illness because of the conditions and what was going on. So we can imagine all of that in our real prisons and jails.
There was a prison policy initiative, one of those, and it was talking about incarcerated individuals with mental illnesses, how much more disciplinary trouble they get into, and how the higher custody levels based on behavior, you will see more mentally ill. Like that, it just carries on. So not only in the free world are we just incarcerating people that have mental illnesses to get them out of the way, then once they're in prison, the prisons are further, it's like jail within jail. So now they're in medium custody, or they're in closed custody, or they're housed in solitary confinement, not getting the help. And we'll just probably come up almost anytime somebody talks to me about prison conditions and why I think they need to change so dramatically. 95% of people incarcerated come back into our communities. We have got to do better. It is not healthy for our communities to not be giving these people the treatment that they need. I definitely want to get your ideas on solutions, Jennifer, because I don't want to just leave it. Yes, everything
Right.
sucks. Everything does suck. Is there hope? What can we
Right.
do? What can
No,
change?
well, so, the places that are doing things right, many counties are moving in that direction. But like the attorney that you showed the video of, things that work, diversion programs, specialty courts. So you have courts that are mental health courts, so that, yes, somebody has committed an offense, but they go through programming, they go through all this intensive therapy, and the charges are dropped or deferred adjudicated. And so you have all these different ways to divert people from the system, from these specialty courts. The other thing is the training, right? The Judicial Commission on Mental Health is a big collaborative organization of judges, DAs. I spoke at the summit this year, and they're learning new ways how to implement mental health treatment and how to do those specialty courts right. Seeing a lot of success with that. And again, going back to some legislation that would mandate county jails to do a better job of diagnosing people, finding ways to hire mental health professionals. Something that we've worked on where I work is trying to get that workforce up. So some ways to do that creatively, or, to tell college students that are getting their degrees in that, like, hey, you don't have to pay your student loan back because this agency will pay it if you come work here. So there are a lot of different ways that we can do that. But I think number one, Marcy, and this is always my go-to answer, because I think at the core of everything is a cultural shift and a cultural change in attitudes and beliefs about how we see mental health and how we see people in crisis, and to stop othering people. You hear the legislators sometimes of a certain lean talk about homeless people and mental health people, people with mental health crisis and people who are formerly incarcerated, as if we are other, as if we are this cup or this pin or that cat. I mean, just like we are not human beings. It's very bizarre. And I think that's at the core of it. Because you wouldn't have officers pulling out somebody that they froze to death in a freezer. If they saw that gentleman as a full human being, they wouldn't have done that. Most likely.
Jennifer, I want to say something before we talk about what our next week's topic is, and we will tell you guys where are you to. I'm froze. Am I okay?
Yeah, you're all right.
Froze, sorry.
You froze for a minute. I was looking for that screenshot capture.
I was waiting for it. Don't screenshot me. So, I wanted to say, one of our mental health care providers on the Dr. Lane Murray unit, he got walked off the unit for having an inappropriate relationship with inmates, his patients. Uh, that actually happened during my incarceration, which leads me to the next week's subject, which is inappropriate relationships between staff members and incarcerated women.
Yeah, yeah, and it's one of those topics that I feel very strongly about. You'll be surprised. Maybe I wonder if people think that. I wonder. We'll see what people think our ideas about that are, because I bet it shocks people that what our opinions are and what we've experienced.
Yeah, I can't wait to share some stories with y'all about inappropriate relationships in prison and where the best place to watch us. I'm not even sure if we'll be on Facebook next week, guys. We might only be on YouTube. So tell us, Jennifer, where can they find our YouTube channel?
So when you go to YouTube, you just type On the Rec Yard. Do you have the little thing? I thought we put it in the ticker last week.
It erased when you sent me the new thing today. So I don't have it.
Wait, you can put somewhere. You can.
Can I type it in the chat maybe?
You can type it in the chat and highlight it.
Okay, let's do that. So I'm just going to put.
It's at On the Rec Yard. And that's YouTube, you guys. That's the YouTube channel. So spread the word. That's
there it
is. We're cooking with grease now.
Look at me all fancy. On the Rec Yard. On the Rec Yard. Thank y'all for hanging out with us. It was a great discussion and it wasn't too triggering. So you guys can definitely, for more information, you can definitely catch either one of our social media pages. We both talk about mental health care in prisons, and we will see y'all next week. Same time, same place on the Rec Yard.
Say goodnight, Taylor.
Yeah.
Look at
Bye,
her asleep.
y'all.
Bye.